let me just start off and say one thing. We're here to remind Salinas that there's more to life than produce. We have 3 cattle ranchers up here. So we're here to talk about growing entrepreneurs in agriculture. And I've got 3 very distinct views, and I think we're going to enjoy hearing from all of them. Sally, do you want to just introduce yourself a little bit? Where are you from? Well, wait a minute. Let me tell everyone where you're from. She's from over the Gabilan Range, over in Pisces, right over the hill.
Right. Yes, I'm a cattle rancher and farmer just about 20 miles due east of here. Also an investor in food system entrepreneurs throughout the country and a philanthropist in the sustainable ag area.
Glenda Humason.
My cattle ranch is a little further away. It's in southwest Colorado. And since my father is still running it, that's why I'm working in California. But really thrilled to be here, currently with the University of California, but have done a variety of projects on triple bottom line, economic development, sustainable development for over 30 years.
Excellent. And Trent.
And I am a cattle rancher from Throckmorton, Texas, a town of 800 people in West Texas. We have a cow-calf operation and also a couple of beef feedlots in the Panhandle. And because my father continues to run that, I started doing international agriculture development in West Africa, started an organization called AgriCorps, which takes American agriculture professionals with a college degree in agriculture to be ag teachers in Ghana and Liberia, supporting future farmer and 4-H type programs there.
And Sally, before we go any further, I want to make sure we talk about no regrets. Can you talk about your investment philosophy a little bit and what the No Regrets Initiative is?
Yes, we just recently launched an initiative that we call the No Regrets Initiative, and it's around rebuilding soil health in the agricultural soils of North America. And it's taking an integrated capital approach, so using philanthropy, investment, and work on the ground to try and basically make some changes in agriculture, utilizing our recent knowledge on soil health and its potential for climate mitigation, as well as carbon sequestration. So we're really taking all the kinds of capital that we have and applying them toward this really important issue that impacts so many of the other issues that people care about: health, water quality, flooding, climate mitigation. So we're putting all in for the next 10 years in working on this area.
All right, Glenda, so do we have a shortage of ag entrepreneurs?
No, Rob, we don't. This is a discussion Rob and I've had a few times. The question is, how do we need to have more ag entrepreneurs? That there's a shortage of them. And I don't think that's the problem. The problem is we don't have the support system to allow the entrepreneurs we have to be successful. And there's a lot of pieces missing.
So what are the components of that? What's missing?
Well, let me jump to Ag Plus, because I know you want to get into that in a little bit. Central Valley Ag Plus Food and Beverage Manufacturing Consortium. One of the reasons I like what they're doing is because they're really trying to take a holistic approach. They've got people looking at trained workforce, adequate infrastructure, access to capital, financing, research and development, supply chain, and so forth. And they're bringing all those people together to jointly work on solutions for their regional attempt to really harvest the jobs and economic development of the farm to fork on a regional basis. And I think it's that cross-disciplinary cross-pollination that's really going to help us get somewhere.
Yep, and so Trent, go ahead.
Yeah, and I would certainly agree with that. We have a workforce problem, a skilled labor issue in rural America. What I see in West Texas, we have rural infrastructure issues from education, healthcare, broadband access, and then an unequal distribution of other goods and services that hold back rural entrepreneurs. For instance, we have the lettuce truck that comes to Throckmorton on Thursday, which means that everyone eats a salad on Friday and no one eats any fresh fruits or vegetables on Tuesday and Wednesday, because we literally have one truck a week that brings fresh produce. That limits the type of person that we can even attract to a rural community if they can't even eat a healthy diet.
Yep. Sally, you were talking a little bit about that too, and you're doing grass-fed, grass-finished beef. Commodity is hard.
Yes. If you're trying to do something different in a system that's currently a commodity system, I mean, Trent talked about being a commodity price taker, and a lot of entrepreneurs are trying not to be commodity price takers by generating some sort of value add, grass-fed, pastured meats, but doing that in the context of a commodity system when we've pretty much destroyed all of the smaller systems that used to be regional or local systems is really a challenge for entrepreneurs. The infrastructure, again, is just not there. The small to medium packing plants, the distributors, the processing facilities. It's hard.
And I think it starts with education. We have to rethink the future of rural education. I think that we have had a great education system in rural America, and then America has changed. And unfortunately, our rural education systems, at least in middle America, have not kept pace with the transformations, the technological transformations that have been happening across the country.
Yep. I think so. I mean, Trent, you were the former national head of FFA. Glenda, you've got 4-H under your purview at UCANR. Let's talk about the skill sets. Let's talk about the education. Are we training entrepreneurs to have the ag skills necessary to be successful from a Wayne Gretzky perspective to where the puck is going to be as opposed to where the puck is now?
That's a great question. I'm not sure we are. I think we're trying. For example, in 4-H, we're urging kids to take on new projects, and more importantly, to just think for themselves. It's one thing to give a kid a kit and explicit instructions and how to go from A to B to C to D to E without them having to think about it. I mean, if we want entrepreneurs, we've got to make our kids start thinking and imagining. Actually, one partner we're pretty excited to be working with, and this may sound funny, but in San Jose, the new Western Regional Office of the U.S. Patent and Trade Office, we discovered they've developed curriculum aimed at grade school and middle school that's about making kids be innovators, inventors, makers. We're going to try to adapt that and make it a 4-H project so that we can start getting these kids to think bigger.
I mean, I actually think one thing, even when we find entrepreneurs and innovators in rural America, there's a capital problem, I think. Particularly in terms of lending, there's a lot of infrastructure that's supported by government guarantees in the commodity world again, but it's very hard for somebody who's trying to work outside of that system, I think, to find capital in a lot of places in the country.
I have to disagree a little bit. In my previous position overseeing rural development for USDA here, we thought that too. And myself and several others organized the California Financial Opportunities Roundtable about 5 years ago. And we were going to bring a bunch of the smartest and best people together to say, what are the roadblocks to capital? And we ended up developing a guidebook on access to capital where we identified about 30 different ways to access capital. What we found is people just don't know about them. They just really don't know about them. So we've got that guidebook out there now, and we're getting ready to actually update it after 5 years. But part of the problem is it's back to that ecosystem. And the ecosystem is, I see it as two things. What I mentioned before is your clusters. The renewable energy, the transportation, the research, etc. Different clusters where you're trying to figure out how to get synergies, how to leverage. Whereas during the value chain, and particularly the ag value chain, you're looking for the roadblocks and bottlenecks. And actually, when you identify those roadblocks and bottlenecks, they're the perfect place for an entrepreneur to step in with a solution to that. But again, we don't help people see the big picture so they can see where those opportunities are.
Yep. And I think one of the things we've talked about before is that maybe some of these entrepreneurial opportunities may not be venture backable opportunities. That there's a gap, particularly in food and agriculture, with low margin between where the market is and what the market needs to remove roadblocks and what a venture capitalist might be looking for that big 10x unicorn. Would you agree?
That's a huge thing we're trying to get people to understand. A lot of the ag tech, like we're looking at here, that might be appropriate for venture capital. A brand new type of retail food thing that could be franchised, that might be appropriate. But for the vast majority, like 90-some% of ag, working landscapes-based economic activity, you're talking patient capital. It is very different.
Well, Sally, you've actually taken an opportunity to actually fund producers.
Yes, we do a lot of work with producers, and we're venture capitalists. The model just doesn't work. It's interesting that I'm from the Silicon Valley, but it's sort of frustrating that this is now the model of equity for every industry all over the United States, because the returns are just not there in a lot of cases. So we work mostly, we're patient capital. Frankly, it's mostly lending for producers, because that seems to work better. And we do not, we don't invest in bar companies and juice companies, because those are venture capital opportunities in the food space. But,
Trent, I was just going to ask you, you've got in West Texas your Rural Entrepreneurs Network as a support network. What are you seeing based on what you're hearing here?
Yeah, so we have our Rural Young Professionals group, which we have to find, we have a 90-mile radius around my hometown to bring in enough people. Again, it's very, very rural. But when it comes to financing, the debt financing is there, but there are some equity needs that to your points, no one wants to participate in because they're too small. We need equity partners at $50,000 and $100,000, and maybe even less than that, that could really do a lot for rural America, and also the same thing internationally. I'm investing in a couple of startup agriculture companies in West Africa, in Ghana and Liberia, and they have the exact same needs. They have a difficulty finding investors who are willing to make a $100,000 investment in their company. Several of the people they go to say, well, come back to us when you need $10 million and we'll talk. So just finding people who are willing to scale that down and still find great margins.
So I want to ask another question, slightly different. Do you think agriculture has a branding issue? In the sense that you got a lot of people in rural areas interested in food and foodie and food porn, and yet agriculture is something that happens far away. Some guy in overalls does it, and I don't have any relationship to that.
It's always had a perception problem. We've been peasants for thousands of years and have been viewed as peasants for thousands of years. I'm not sure why we think that would be any different in the year 2017. So we've always had a perception problem. That's not new. I think some of our challenges are new, but sometimes we are also our own worst enemy in this. The farmer loves to play up this Jeffersonian agrarian myth, which is great every 7 years when the Farm Bill is up for a vote in Congress. But when we're trying to talk about genetically modified organisms and chemical usage and improved value and all these other things that are very high science and high tech, that agrarian myth disadvantages us.
Other comments about kind of the linkages and creating, looking at that relationship between rural and urban?
I mean, I think that this is changing there are people interested in urban areas who are starting to at least go to farmers markets and who are paying, as the organic producer who was up here earlier said, consumers are paying attention and they are voting with their dollars. And I think that perception problem maybe is changing a little bit in some places. So.
Yeah, and I think it's actually an opportunity. If we can get the rural sector, particularly the agricultural, to understand, and simultaneously the urban sector to understand that a regional food system economic development strategy is good for both of them, and they'll start working together on a regional basis, it's pretty exciting to see what happens. We've seen some examples of that around the state.
Yeah, and I think, Sally, what Piscini's Ranch does, we'll hear from Kevin Watt from Tomcat Ranch a little later too, looking at using cattle and working landscapes to improve soil health, water retention, see that it's a potential win-win that doesn't have to be an urban environmentalist versus an agricultural producer.
Right, I think there's a lot of progress being made that there has been sort of an environmentalist ag producer divide as well. And I think land trusts and a lot of environmental groups are figuring out that we are all in this together and should work together and can work together, that we really do care about the most important things. We're aligned on those things.
One thing that we were talking about, yeah, Trent, go ahead.
I was also going to reverse that question and say that in rural America, there's also a perception issue of urban America. Mm-hmm. And so we can talk about the perception of urban America on rural America, but there's also this perception issue that rural America has, that urban America is out to get them, that they are elitist, that the people in this room are here to tell farmers and people in small towns how to live and what to do. And that creates a huge divide as well. Mm-hmm. But I think that there's also a great solution there. There is a technology gap between urban and rural America. And as we watch TV and movies in small towns and we see urban America progressing, probably most of you used 5 apps within the last hour, and half of those aren't really suited to a small town. Being able to fill that technology gap, and maybe, Rob, as you and I have discussed, there are technologies that are available and that could solve some of the problems in rural America, but they haven't been promoted or marketed to us. Mm-hmm. Here's a great, very simple example. I just started an Airbnb in Throckmorton. And in 2 months that I've had it up and running, I've had 50% occupancy on it. But when we first promoted it, no one in my hometown of 800 people had any idea what Airbnb even was. And within the last 2 months, there are 3 more people in my town of 800 people that are now putting up a room on Airbnb. But no one has come to us to market these technologies to rural America, and they could benefit us in a great and tremendous way.
Glenda?
I think he's actually bringing up one of the 2 big potential roadblocks that the whole ag tech sector really needs to think about. And one of them is access to the internet, access to broadband, high speed, good quality, consistent broadband, fiber, whatever. Because as we start having more soil sensors and self-driving tractors and drones and all this bandwidth that's needed, and it's not available, and it's not in most of rural anywhere, it's going to be a problem. It's going to slow down this whole effort. It's one of 2 big issues I see that the ag tech sector really needs to be looking at.
Yep. By the way, we had an opportunity to have a conversation with Dean Thulin from Cal Poly, who's here, as well as Dean Winterstein from Iowa State earlier in the week. It was amazing for me to hear that 70% of the applicants to the school, Cal Poly School of Ag, Food, and Environment are from urban areas. Mm-hmm. Same thing with Iowa State. So there's definitely a lot of interest coming from the urban areas and urban kids to get into agriculture and food production. I think that's really an interesting thing to pursue. Any comment on that? All right, so then one other thing, when we started this, we talked about, do we have enough ag entrepreneurs? We identified some areas where we do have gaps. So for instance, the world wants a plant-forward based diet, and yet we don't have a lot of plant scientists, or a lot enough students that are stepping into that.
I have to admit, I was a little surprised myself Tuesday morning at that panel that all 3 of the deans said that was their big problem. They don't have a problem getting kids applying to animal science, but they can't get half the kids they need applying for plant science, agronomy, horticulture, any of those type of specialties. And that's a huge problem. It actually ties into the second big problem that the ag tech really needs to be looking at. Yeah, and actually you heard a couple people mention it earlier today. You can build the best machine in the world to pick or manipulate or do something to a crop, but the reality is most of the time you've got to have a crop that's able to be handled by that machine. You know, it's true. And to get a new plant varietal or a new aspect of a plant, you're talking several years minimum for specialty crops, could be a couple decades, even longer for plants or trees and vines. So if we're not doing the research that creates the kind of plants and crops that are able to be handled by machines, all these lovely machines aren't going to get very far very fast.
Yep. I want to open it up. Are there any questions we have for the panel? No? Yes. We have a mic around? Right here.
Thank you. Beth Tillman, Firefly Farms in Connecticut. We have found one of the major problems in dealing with the public with selling our meat retail and to restaurants is the fact that the vast majority of people have no clue how their food is raised, where it comes from, and what the inputs are. Do you have any suggestions for a way to change our educational process such that children are exposed to exactly how food, both produce and animal protein, are produced?
And let's not forget the brown cows that produce the chocolate milk.
Yeah, that was a good one. I think we're actually doing a pretty good job in the last several years. Almost every school out there has a school garden now. It's been exponential, the growth in school gardens. Now, livestock, that's a tougher one. All we can do is try to get kids out on them. One of the programs we do as part of 4-H and youth development, and actually nutrition, is we haul thousands of kids out to see working farms as much as we can. But it takes time and money to do that.
And I would also say there are programs, American Farm Bureau and several different extension services have Ag in the Classroom, where they're taking ag literacy programs into urban and suburban elementary schools and junior high schools. So I agree there's certainly an uptick. We can certainly do a whole lot more, but we are beginning to do some of that. I would also say that there's, and this door goes both ways, but there's a transparency issue in agriculture. But as a producer, I would be very scared to have someone come onto my ranch or our feedlot because of the way everyone has a phone. They would take a picture of something out of context, and it would end up on CNN or Fox News, and then the market drops as a result of someone projecting what they think a picture means. So there's a transparency issue, but that transparency issue stems from distrust.
Yep.
So
We had a question over here. Yes?
Yes, in regard to your comments about potential investments, there's a great demand in the world for non-hormone treated cattle, for organic cattle, and for grass-fed cattle, which is not being met. I own Greater Omaha Packing Company. I process 2,400 head of steers a day. I am the largest supplier of beef to the EU, and just this week, we were the first U.S. supplier of beef to China in 13 years. And for those parts of the world, they demand non-hormone treated cattle, non-hormone treated beef, and we are not able to satisfy that supply.
Yep.
So can you tell me why that is, when there are so many cattle feeders that we guarantee them a profit if they will abide by those beef export verification standards for so many of these countries?
I can sum it up in one word: infrastructure. We don't have the medium scale slaughter facilities that enable that. And
I have to
it's
disagree with
really
that.
challenging to get them out there.
I disagree with that.
Well, I've been working on this for 10 years here. We've brought money in, we've had people design facilities, we've even had people offer land, but there's always some hurdle that you just can't get past. And
Well, here I
it's a
am.
variety of them.
Here I am.
Come on in and talk to people.
Well,
but
Sally-
you're one person. We need dozens of them.
I mean, I think this is.
You want to make a final comment?
Oh, sorry.
Sure. The EU is a great demand for non-hormone treated beef. China, which just opened up in the last 2 or 3 days, could possibly be the biggest beef export market ever. So there's a demand by every packer that can meet the processing requirements. They're a little bit more rigid, but there's many of us out there that can meet those.
I'm going to cut you off there so we can hear from the panelists. I appreciate your question. I would encourage you to read, there's recently a Stone Barns report on the grass-fed industry here in the United States. And just to give you a sense, the grass-fed, grass-finished cattle market, we produce 325,000 head in the entire United States. That's not going to cut it. If you look at where the large-scale production of that meat is happening, it's mostly in New Zealand and Australia and other places like that. And I would agree with Glenda that if you look at the infrastructure, I think we've halved the number of slaughterhouses in the United States in the 1960s. Sally, how far do you have to travel to slaughter?
Oh, only 3 or 4 hours.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not bad. Yeah.
What I want to do, we've got to, okay.
This is a slightly different style question, but you guys are the only people I think who can answer it. Is we're small livestock, we do MIG grazing, and one of the problems we have is getting products of a quality level to use in the pasture that will actually stand up to our needs. One of those would be like a grazing reel or something like that that doesn't spin off, but whenever I've talked to any of the major manufacturers of the field equipment, no one has any interest of producing a product that is different from what every other single producer makes, and I haven't been able to find anybody who is interested in innovating new grazing tools. And I'm wondering if you guys have access to or knowledge of someone who wants to produce things for MIG grazing, for high intensive moving of animals on a daily basis, because it's a dead market. Even though New Zealand and Australia make lots of these products, they all are stagnated at sort of a play school level.
Right.
Do you have anything to comment on that?
You're right.
Yeah, so the only thing I would say is there's a great conference, I think, don't quote me on this, September 27, 29, called the Grass-Fed Exchange. It's going to be in Albany, and it's for grass-fed producers. And it's the best place in the United States where small-scale producers are getting together and talking about this. I think there's a need for more international collaboration to look at small-scale, bringing back small-scale cattle production.
And obviously a perfect example of one of those bottlenecks that could use both some entrepreneurs and some research.
Yep.
And I would also add to that a skilled workforce
Yes,
as well.
yes.
There was a large ranch in my area that was using a improved state-of-the-art new grazing method. The problem was that the owner wasn't out there every day because it was a very large ranch, 35,000 acres, and his cowboys that only had a high school degree and were looking for to work as less as they have to, they weren't doing it properly. So actually it mismanaged the land as a result of, so you have to think kind of to the, I hate to say it, but to the lowest common denominator, and how do you get that person sold on implementing a new technology, and if they aren't going to buy into it and actually do it, then it's not going to ever happen.
So I didn't expect this panel to become a cattle panel, but this has been fun. What I'd like each of you to do is go back to that original topic of ag entrepreneurship, and if you could just very briefly talk about a certain entrepreneur, ag entrepreneur that you've experienced that you see as a success case. And I'll start with you, Trent.
Yeah, one that was a fellow in AgriCorps this past year, his name's Clayton Carling, is a graduate from University of Illinois. He was the USDA Agri-Entrepreneur of the Year because when he was in high school, through his FFA project, started the Sweet Corn Shack. And he began to grow sweet corn on 12 acres, built up to 12 acres, had contracts with local grocers that he was providing for them. And then he took that knowledge, that entrepreneurial knowledge, went to Ghana, was working with agro-entrepreneurs in West Africa, helping them set up their businesses and establish a 4-H program there. And now he's coming back to be a plant breeder, going to Iowa State and getting his PhD in plant breeding there.
Excellent. Glenda?
You know, we've got a lot of entrepreneurs I've worked with over the years, and rather than choose my favorite child, I decided just to throw out to the crowd an example that maybe will inspire all of them to help entrepreneurs. And it's the woman who was hired to be the CEO of the Humboldt County Fairgrounds about 7 or 8 years ago, who came in there and saw a need and just bootstrapped and hook and crook and shoestrings and just a few dollars here and there, started bringing entrepreneurs in one by one. And she's now incubated over 15 entrepreneurs on the county fairgrounds, 2 of which got so big they had to go bigger grounds, 40, 50 employees. And she didn't do anything that special. She just did it. And I think that's what we've all got to start doing.
Excellent. Sally?
I'll talk about a young woman we met in Missouri who was a lamb producer, a serial entrepreneur, done dairy. Now she's producing lamb, animal welfare approved. She got a contract with a regional grocery store, is now providing lamb from 12 different producers into 80 different grocery stores. And now we've given her lines of working capital as well as an equity loan, and she's expanding into a small line of leather products, trying to add value to the skins that are coming off of these lambs. So she's just one example of people we see doing this sort of work all over the country. Yeah.
Excellent. On that note, we're over time. If you would, please help me thank Sally, Glenda, and Trent for their comments.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.